session of this topic, today's topic. I would like to give you a warmly welcome again to Dr. Mark and Mr. Fikri, our lecturer and moderator for this second session. We're going to proceed to the next session, which the topic is tropical peatland and forest biodiversity and conservation management in Central Kalimantan, Indonesia. In this session, the topic will be presented by Dr. Mark Horrison from University of Exeter, UK, and moderated by Mr. Fikri Ardiansyah, Bachelor of Forestry and Master of Science. Before we really gonna proceed to the material, to the presentation, I would like to give a brief introduction from Dr. Mark Horrison. Dr. Mark Horrison, from the recent research, is one of the experience of Dr. Mark Horrison is co-supervised dissertation projects for 33 BSc, 18 master students, and 8 PhD students. Not only that, Dr. Mark Horrison also led all aspects of a field module for University of Leicester master student in Indonesia, plus 2 foundation and 2 undergraduate degree modules for Cornwall College, Norway. Sorry. Besides of that, our moderator, Mr. Fikri Ardiansyah, Bachelor of Forestry and also Master of Agriculture, has an experience in GIS spatial planning and disaster risk management at UGM in 2017. And also, Mr. Fikri was being a junior lecturer since 2018. Without further ado, Dr. Mark and Mr. Fikri, please proceed the stage.
Ya, oke. Selamat siang semuanya. Selamat siang. Selamat siang. Good evening, everyone. Okay. Thank you for the host have introduced me with Dr. Mark. Yeah, Dr. Mark already with us here, and actually I'm so nervous, but I'm so grateful also because Mark is my supervisor and my examiner for my PhD program here in UGM. And yeah, this is a good opportunities for us, and I believe this will be a great experience. So use these incredible opportunities. Keep your eyes open. Yeah, keep your mind open. We will develop our knowledge, yeah, about the management of tropical peatland with the great experts, Dr. Mark A. Edward Horrison from the University of Exeter, United.
Recording in progress.
We have time for 90 minutes, 60 minutes for the presentation by Dr. Mark Horrison. And the last 30 minutes, we have time for the discussion. So, yeah, without further ado, please welcome Dr. Mark Horrison.
Yeah, thank you very much, Fikri, and to our MC, and well, to to the whole summer course and to UGM for inviting me to participate in this summer course. It's a great privilege, and I'm happy to be here and to be with you all and to be able to share some of our experiences with you, and I hope it's interesting. I hope that you're all able to keep your eyes open, and yeah, I hope that you enjoy the field course. Today I'm going to be talking about tropical peatlands and tropical forests in Central Kalimantan, and the biodiversity in those forests and the conservation of those forests. Indonesia obviously is, as we were talking about at the dinner last night, is a country with many thousands of different islands, and obviously we're here in Java today. But the island of Kalimantan or Borneo, Kalimantan is the Indonesian part of Borneo, is much bigger than Java, with much fewer people, but also is quite different and has lots of forest there as well. I don't know how do I talk to you to move the slides? All right, great. Maybe. So today I'll just give a brief introduction about me, about the Borneo Nature Foundation, who we work with in Borneo, and where we work, a bit of a background on biodiversity, and on the ecology of tropical peat swamp forests, because this is a little bit different to dryland forests, some of the threats facing this biodiversity, and the management of tropical peat swamp forests as well, focusing on what's called the 4Rs approach. And then finally, we'll look at the importance of biodiversity monitoring in conservation, and that applies both for tropical peat swamp forests, but also for other environments as well. Okay. Forward. Okay, so well, I was already introduced a little bit beforehand, so I don't really want to focus very much on me, but just a little bit of a background as to who I am, that might help you kind of interpret some of the presentation today. But yeah, I'm obviously from the UK. So I guess I'm pleased to represent the UK here, I suppose. I don't think there's anyone else from the UK, so so happy to do that. I did my education in the UK, and for my PhD, I studied orangutan breeding ecology in Kalimantan. So that's why I first visited Indonesia. Because I was interested in orangutans, and I'd seen orangutans in magazines and on television in the UK, and I thought, wow, that sounds great. I want to do that, and so that attracted me to Indonesia, and probably, you know, the same is maybe true for many people from foreign countries, attracted to country by big kind of fancy dramatic animals, but then you come to the country and you learn more about the country, and you learn more about the forests and the people, and over time, I think you get a broader understanding and a broader appreciation of not only all of the other different wildlife and biodiversity that lives in these places, but also of the people in these places as well, how important the people are, and how important it is to work with many different people and many different local stakeholders, and work in that way. So I've done some research in Tanzania, Malawi, and Africa. But most of my research has been here in Indonesia and in Kalimantan. Yeah, I work with Borneo Nature Foundation International and the University of Exeter. And we've been, you know, happy to have had a collaboration now with UGM for a number of years, for about 4 years or so now. With Pak Imran and Fikri, and others. Yes, research is mostly focused on biodiversity, and forest restoration, forest conservation. Next, please. Okay, so what is Borneo Nature Foundation? I'll just give a bit of a background. You all know who UGM are, you're here. University of Exeter is a university in the UK, so that's kind of, you know, like a normal university, I suppose. Oh, there's some good trees. They weren't my trees. Yeah. But they were nice trees. Yeah, second. Okay, yeah, landed. Okay, we appear to have frozen. I think I've frozen as well. Hey. Okay. Okay. Well, maybe while we're waiting for the bridge to recover, so Borneo Nature Foundation is an NGO. It is based both in Indonesia and internationally. So I work for the international side of Borneo Nature Foundation, and we have many Indonesian staff, nearly 100 Indonesian staff who work for BNF in Indonesia. And the kind of mission of BNF is to conserve and protect the incredible rainforests of Central Kalimantan for the benefits that these provide for biodiversity, people, and climate. And we do this through on-the-ground conservation work. So that includes things like forest patrols and firefighting, through research and training. So that's primarily my involvement is primarily in those areas as a researcher. Also through sustainable livelihood development and working with local communities, and through local and international outreach and education activities, which includes with local government and also with general public and with industry. Next, please. Yep. And we work with many different partners to do that. So lots of different universities from around the world, including, of course, UGM, other universities in Indonesia, Universitas Palangkaraya and Muhammadiyah Palangkaraya, Christian University of Palangkaraya as well, and with local government and NGOs. Next, please. Okay. Everyone following so far? You can hear me okay? Yeah, not talking too fast, too slow. It's all good. All right. Right. So where are we then? Where is Borneo, Kalimantan? Well, we are where the arrow is pointing at. So there we are. You can kind of see my shiny zapper isn't very good. But we are in Java, and Kalimantan is, as I say, part of Indonesia as well, but the Indonesian part of Borneo. So, you know, we had some of our friends last night from the Malaysian part of Borneo telling us all about their culture and everything there. And so this is the same island. So ecologically may be quite similar in places. The forests are often quite similar in the Malaysian and the Indonesian parts of Borneo. But obviously culturally there are quite large differences there sometimes as well. And also lots of similarities. Next, please. Borneo or Kalimantan, I'll just kind of use both of those words for the same thing probably a lot of the time. Sometimes I might say Borneo, sometimes I might say Kalimantan, but it's an incredibly rich area for biodiversity. So we have something like 15,000, probably a lot more than that actually, species of flowering plants, which is about 4% of the total in the whole world. Thousands of species of trees, hundreds of species of mammals and birds, and lots of different primates as well. At least 13 different non-human primates, and 8 of those are endemic. That means that they're found nowhere else in the world, so they're only found on the island of Borneo. Animals like the Pegasus monkey, for example. Next, please. Okay, so So we at BNF and I have 3 different main research areas where we work in Central Kalimantan. This is just a map of Central Kalimantan here, by the way. So all of Borneo is much bigger, and this is just one province there. And this here is about in the geographic middle of Borneo, at the north of Central Kalimantan, just to give you a bit of a reference. And the first of those sites is in the Murung Raya Regency, around the Brito Ulu area. This is dipterocarp forest, so this is dryland forest with mineral soils. That's a relatively recent research site, so we haven't done so much here yet. The second is in Rungan. That's another different forest type. So that there is a mosaic of Karangas forest or heath forest, which has like kind of sandy soil with a thin layer of peat on the top, mixed with some peat forest as well. We've been working there since 2015. And the last site is Sabangau in the south of the island, which is a pure peat swamp forest that is very thick in places. And we've been working there for about 25 years. And so this is quite nice, because here we have kind of the 3 different main forest types that you find in this part of the island. So we have a dipterocarp forest, a kind of Karangas heath forest, and a peat swamp forest as well. So that's the rationale behind having those 3 different sites. Next, please. Most of what I talk about today will be about the Sabangau forest, because that's the peatland site, and that's where we have the longest history of the research and the most impatience. So that's what I'll talk about to you mostly today. Also because we don't have so much time to talk about all of the different sites. So this is just a visual image from above of Sabangau National Park. And you can see there, tropical forest canopy. And peatlands, by the way, are found throughout the world. Just here on Kalimantan, we have these tropical forests that grow on top of the peat soil. Next, please. And there are, as I say, many different species of animal, of wildlife that we find in these forests. So this includes the Bornean orangutan. Next. A few next to come here. The gibbon, this is the white-bearded gibbon, which is the species that we have in Sabangau. There are other different gibbon species throughout the island. Next, various other species of primate. This here is a red langur or klassi, to use the local Dayak name. This sun-clouded leopard, or chan, to use the local name. One of 5 different cat species, that wild cat species that there are on Borneo, and really secretive and really hard to actually study. I mean, I've been doing research in Sabangau for about 20 years, and I've never seen a clouded leopard directly with my own eyes in the forest. But we have camera traps in the forest. I guess maybe some people nodding heads, so you know what camera traps are. That's great. And these camera traps are really good at capturing images of animals like this. And every month we get pictures of these animals on the camera trap. So they're there, and I bet they see us researchers all the time. Probably every day they see researchers, but we never see them because they're secretive. So a really useful tool for studying animals like this, these kind of remote camera traps. Next, please. Lots of other different types of animals as well. Various different species of frog. Next. And other reptiles and amphibians. There's a skink here. Next. lots of different species of insect, butterflies, moths, beetles, and all sorts of different things. Next is a praying mantis. They're quite common. Next. And also in the forest of this area, we have quite a lot of pitcher plants, which are interesting. I mean, they look quite fun and interesting, but they're also actually ecologically quite interesting as well, because pitcher plants, if you don't know, they feed off insects and things as well. So they have like this cup here, and there's some water in the bottom of the, well, not water, but liquid in the bottom of the cup. And so insects will come and visit the pitcher plants here and fall inside, and then drown in the liquid, and the plant gets nutrients from that. And the reason why I say this is interesting is because you often get lots of these plants in areas that are relatively poor from nutrition in the soil. So that's kind of an indicator that there's limited nutrients in the environment, and so we get a lot of these in peat swamps in Borneo, and also in Karangas forest in Borneo as well. Next, please. Okay, so here's just some numbers for you. I'm not going to read all of those numbers out, but just to make the general point that there are lots of different species of plants and animals in these forests. They have very high levels of biodiversity. I will just maybe quickly draw your attention here. So we're talking about Sabangau, where we have our long-term research site in the peatland there. And just in the kind of one research site that we work in, about 500 hectares or something, we've documented 215, at least 215 different species of tree. Now, in the entire UK, we have only about 30. So just in this one small research site, we have like 7 times as many trees as we have in the whole country of the United Kingdom. So that's just to kind of illustrate how rich these forests are. And many of these species are of course protected legally in Indonesia, and are considered to be threatened on the IUCN red list. Next, please. And sort of mentioning at the beginning, orangutans are one species that are kind of the flagship conservation species for Borneo, for Kalimantan, and are what draw many people's attention to these forests. And they're very, they're highly threatened. That's one reason why there aren't that many of them left. And also they're very close to us. They share many kind of human characteristics. They have hands and feet that look similar to ours, and they're very intelligent, and they're genetically very similar to us. And they're very, their ecology and their behavior is very interesting as well. So people maybe naturally feel like they, bond more with orangutans or care more about orangutan, potentially. And so like myself, much kind of funding and research attention, etc., for biological research in Kalimantan goes towards orangutans. Now, I think there's, we can maybe talk about this a little bit later, but you might say, well, orangutans are no more important than anything else. There's thousands of species of insects and hundreds of species of bird and everything. Why focus on orangutans? And that would be a good question. You would probably be right to think that. but also, we can think that, well, if people want to give money to save orangutans and it protects a forest, then great, it protects all the birds and all of the insects and all of the trees and everything that are in that forest. So, it's an interesting issue. Next, please. Okay, so why is a lot of this biodiversity under threat? Well, these maps here just kind of show the changes in forest cover on Borneo over time. So obviously we're starting here in the 1950s and then moving kind of towards the present day, with the green obviously being forest. So the equator goes right through the middle of Borneo, around here somewhere. And so naturally, kind of almost the whole of the island would be covered in tropical forest of some type. If we can next again, please. Yeah. And if we project into the future, then we see further projections for forest loss as well. Now, does anyone notice anything maybe? So the black and the grey on this map here, if this is projecting forward to, I think it's 2080, 2050. So the black and the grey are still forests. Does anybody kind of notice anything about this map? Any thoughts looking at the map and where the forests are, etc.? Anyone like to suggest anything? Perfect. Yeah. Yeah. So as our friend here was saying, in case everyone didn't hear, the loss of forest is kind of around the edges, around the coastal areas. And those are the areas where most people live. Those are the areas that are, lowest altitude. And as you go into the middle of Borneo here, then you get into more mountainous areas where not very many people live, and the topography is very hilly and quite mountainous. So it would actually be quite difficult to cut forest down in the middle of Borneo, just because of the logistics of the access and everything there. Unfortunately, of course, the lowland forests around the edges are also where we find most of the biodiversity, or a lot of the biodiversity as well. So that does create conflict there. Next, please. Okay, so I've talked a little bit about peatlands and peat swamp forests. So I'll just explain a little bit about what they are, because this is relevant for you to understand, and maybe as a different ecosystem that you're not familiar with. So hopefully it's interesting to learn a little bit about. So peatlands form anywhere in the world where you have high levels of rainfall and you have poor drainage. So in those kind of situations, you get flooding a lot of the time. And what that then means is that dead plants and animals in those areas, they will fall to the floor, and they can't then decompose properly. So normally in a dry forest, a tree falls on the floor and it decomposes and it kind of almost like disappears, right? But in a peat forest, that doesn't happen quite so much, and so you get this buildup of dead organic material over time, and that becomes peat. So as more things get added on top of it, it builds up and gets thicker and thicker. And so that is basically how peat forms. And if you were to bury that under rocks for many thousands of years, then you would get coal. So there you go. That's where coal comes from. And this is important to understand because the management of these ecosystems has to consider this important role of water in the ecosystem. So although the forests in tropical peatlands might kind of look similar to dryland forests, the management of them needs to consider this role of water. Okay, please. And in Western Indonesia, we have lots of peatlands. There's also lots of peatlands in Papua as well. But the peatlands in Western Indonesia are concentrated here on the east coast of Sumatra, and here in kind of south and west of Borneo, and also some in Malaysian Borneo as well. But big area around here, which is in Central Kalimantan, where we have our research. Next, please. Okay, Indonesia actually has a really large area of peatland. There's nearly 250,000 square kilometers of peatland in Indonesia. Which is about sort of 13% or so of the whole world. And Kalimantan has quite a lot of that. So it has about a quarter of that peatland in Indonesia is in Kalimantan. And Sabangau is one of the biggest areas of peatland in Kalimantan as well. And this peatland contains lots and lots of carbon. So we were talking about coal just a short while ago. And obviously coal contains a lot of carbon, so this peatland also contains lots of carbon. Next, please. What we tend to get in tropical peatlands, in southern Borneo at least, is that because we have this kind of buildup of dead plant material over time, then that tends to kind of build up, and you get these kind of dome shapes here, where the thickest peat is in the middle of the dome, and then you have a river kind of either side of the dome. So in between two rivers, you have these peat domes that are shallower at the edges and deeper in the middle. Next, please. And this is actually quite important because this has quite an influence on the habitat and the wildlife that are found within this peatland area. So in the last slide, I was talking about these domes that form. So here's a kind of 3D visualization of the peat dome in Sabangau, with the rivers kind of either side of it, and then the dome in the middle. This is exaggerated, so it's not actually that tall. I mean, that looks like mountains, but it actually is only about 10 meters or something, maybe the height difference from the rivers to the middle of the dome. But just so you can see it here. So it's deep, thicker in the middle of the dome. Next, please. And this influences the type of habitat that you see in different parts of the peatland. So you see these different colors here on the map to the right are different habitat subtypes we talk about. So you have different colors, different habitat subtypes at the edges of the dome than you do in the thicker peat in the middle. Next, please. And this is all driven by water. So I was talking about water earlier. And so here we're just going to kind of quickly compare some of the characteristics of these habitat subtypes. And so if we look at the peat depth first of all, this is shallowest in the mixed swamp, which is closest to the rivers. It's then kind of medium depth in the low pole, we call it. And then in the middle of the tall pole, the peat is the deepest or the thickest. And if we look at the water, it kind of doesn't follow exactly the same pattern, but it's quite wet around the edge. It's very wet in the low pole, and it's dry, relatively dry in the middle. Because the middle is a bit higher, that it doesn't the water table doesn't reach quite as high in the middle. Next, please. Can you go back? Can you bisa mundur sedikit? Coba lanjut lagi. There should have been some more in that table, and when he clicked next, I thought that it was going to remove bits of things so we could see more of the table. The point that I was going to make is, so we said that the low pole was wettest, then the mixed swab, and then the tall pole was the driest. What we see is in the wettest habitat, in the low pole, we see the trees are shorter, hence the name low pole. So the trees are shorter. There is less diversity of tree species. There is less diversity of animal species, and there is less abundance of animals as well. So we have lower densities of things like orangutans and gibbons. And the highest densities of orangutans and gibbons and the tallest trees are found in the tall pole habitat. So this is all kind of related to the water depth that we were talking about. The wettest habitat is basically the least productive. And that is because it is more difficult for plants to extract nutrients from the soil in these flooded environments. And because of that, it is therefore harder for trees to grow, and there's less animals, etc. Okay. Yep. Lanjut. Yeah. And peat swamp forests are also really valuable because of all the ecosystem services that they provide. So we've been talking about biodiversity, but we shouldn't forget, and indeed we must centralize the role that these, or the function that these forests play for local people as well. So these forests serve as a source of forest products, so for timber, but also for non-timber forest products as well. So things like rattans maybe, or medicinal plants, etc. They help to maintain water quality and quantity. Oh, hello. Because they're wet, they help to prevent fires. I'll just carry on talking. Hopefully I can remember most things. And they also, they're important for gas exchanges. They're important for cultural reasons. Lots of local beliefs and local traditions involve the forest and forest animals. And they are particularly important for as breeding grounds for fish as well. So local livelihoods in Central Kalimantan, in rural Central Kalimantan, in the villages. Fishing is often very, very important there. And yes, so lots of economic benefits and public health benefits as well, as I mentioned, through helping to prevent fire and maintain clean air. Okay, next please. Okay, so yeah, we now have talked a little bit about tropical peat swamp forests. We kind of hopefully understand a little bit what they are, how they form, and the biodiversity that we find there, and also their importance for local people. So these forests have unfortunately also suffered high rates of loss over the decades. So don't try and look at all the numbers in this table because it's scary. But next, please. Is this going to work? Yes. So if we just take this column here. This is showing the change in peat swamp forest area over time in the different parts. If you can't read it, it doesn't matter too much. The key point here is that there has been loss of peat swamp forest in all of the different parts of Southeast Asia where it's found. So in both the Indonesian parts, in Kalimantan, Sumatra, and also in Malaysia as well. And next, please. And that is true in Central Kalimantan too, which has one of the highest areas of peatland. Next, please. So why is this happening? We have a few more pictures here in case you're getting bored of looking at words. So part of the reason is from logging disturbances, which was more of a threat maybe 20, 30 years ago than it is today in Kalimantan for peat swamps. Next, please. There's often, with lots of uses of peat swamps, there is drainage associated with it. And I mean, this looks like beautiful kind of forest stream and it looks lovely and natural. But actually this isn't. This has been dug by people in the forest. So this would have been dug by illegal loggers previously. And so, loggers would used to extract logs from timber from tropical peat forests by often building these canals. Because the peat is so wet, you can't really build roads and things going into these forests. That would take trucks in there. That doesn't really work. So instead, they dig these canals and then chop the trees down, and then in the wet season you can float the timber out along the canals to the river, and then you can process them there and export them to wherever they're going. This does create problems though, and we'll talk about those. Next, please. So drainage is often used for agriculture. Does people know what this is? Yeah, okay. I guess most people here from Southeast Asia, this is a more difficult question maybe when I ask people in the UK. But most people here will know what this is. Yeah, so not just palm oil, of course, but lots of other different crops are planted in the region, and for most types of crops, some level of drainage of the peatland is needed because most crops don't survive very well in a flooded swamp, unfortunately. Next, please. This slide here is just showing a map that is making the basic point that there have been lots of concessions issued for forests in this region. So both timber concessions, palm oil concessions, and other concessions. And those concessions are yellow and orange on the map here. So we can see that particularly in this part kind of here, there have been lots of concessions issued to the forests in those areas. Next, please. And one of the main reasons why this drainage of peat swamps is such a big problem is because it contributes towards fire. It leads to fire. So a peatland, when it's wet, doesn't burn. Surprisingly, right? I mean, wet things don't tend to burn. But when you dry it out, then it actually becomes highly flammable. And indeed, in some countries, like where I'm from in the UK, hundreds of years ago, they would burn peat fuel to use to heat their homes in the wintertime when it's cold, because it does burn very well. And when it does burn, it's very difficult to then extinguish these fires as well. And so in intense dry seasons, often associated with El Nino events, then you often get these large peatland fires. Next, please. Okay, and here's just some areas of peatland burning. Next, please. Okay. So that is now, so we talked a little bit about the biodiversity and the forests and the ecology. We then just talked now a bit about the threats that are facing these forests. And now I just want to talk for a little while about some of the kind of conservation side of things and conservation solutions. And I don't want to say that I have all of the answers, or I'm perfect with all these solutions, or whatever. And it's a continual process of learning. But nevertheless, I think we've got a fair understanding of the different problems now, and have had some success with the conservation efforts that the BNF Indonesia team have implemented. So if we're talking then about tackling these problems and conservation solutions, so if we're looking at any one area of peat swamp forest, or any forest, or any ecosystem, actually, not even just forest, anywhere in the world, it is very likely that there is not just one single problem. There is probably more than one threat in that particular area. There might be 5, 10 or more, maybe, threats in that particular area. And there is rarely also one reason why those problems exist in the first place as well. There's, societies are very complex places. There's lots of different actors involved and lots of different interests. And so because of that, there's also rarely one single solution as well. And I often sort of think that if someone is coming and saying, oh, there's this place, this is the problem, this is the one solution, and they probably don't understand the place and the problems well enough, because it's almost certainly going to be more complicated than that. And also these threats will change over time, and from place to place as well. The threats that we experience in Sabangau might not be quite the same as the threats that we see in other peatlands in Indonesia or Malaysia or anywhere. Next, please. And so we need to think about both dealing with the kind of short-term impacts. Oh, okay, thank you. And the underlying drivers of these threats. So if we use fire as an example here, the short-term impacts of fire are, there is a fire today. It is in this peatland area. It is in this forest. We need teams there with hose pipes, firefighters to extinguish that fire today. Otherwise, tomorrow there will be no forest. So it's a very immediate thing. In the long term, though, if we're going to solve the fire problem, then we need to be thinking about what drives that problem. We need to be thinking about hydrology of peatlands, why the peatlands are dry in the first place, the different social pressures and society pressures and economic pressures, etc., that cause those fires to happen. Next, please. And there are also different levels of interventions as well. So we tend to focus on the local situation in Central Kalimantan within BNF. Next, please. And I mentioned about the 4 R's approach. This is kind of this is kind of like the Indonesian government 3 R's approach, but with one more added. So if you press next, what happens? Press next, please. Okay. Yeah. So the first of these 4 peatlands is rewetting. Rewetting the swamp, making it these drain swamps wet again. Next is revegetation, so burned areas, recovering the vegetation there. Next, the third is revitalization. which is working with local communities to find ways to revitalize local economies in a way that is friendly to the peat swamp environment. Next, please. And the fourth then is reducing fire. So having fire teams and fire responses set up. And this last point is important, and we kind of suggested adding here because you can potentially have, let's say, a revegetation project where you have planted 10,000 trees or something, and maybe that took you 10 years and your results are great, or your trees are 3 meters, 4 meters tall or something now, and animals are coming back. Great. And then tomorrow there's a fire and it all burns down. So if you haven't got those mechanisms in place to reduce fire, if that isn't part of the of that strategy development, then the high risk involved there. Next, please. Okay, so next again. So yeah, re-wetting, as I said, this involves generally building dams in the canals that have been built through the swamp, so we can stop the water flowing out fast and keep the swamp wet. Next, please. The revegetation, that involves both trying to protect areas that are recovering naturally. So sometimes, burned areas or degraded areas, logged areas can recover on their own, and they just require some protection so that they don't degrade further. But in cases where that isn't possible for whatever reason, or is happening very slowly, then there can be need to actually plant tree species in those areas as well. So that's what this is. Next, please. Revitalization. Here, for example, is some fish ponds. So this is some sort of aquaculture kind of development. As I mentioned earlier, local communities in this area are often highly dependent on fishing. So this is just an effort here for trying to develop these kind of community livelihood initiatives. I'm going a bit quickly because I'm wary of time. Next, please. And finally is the reducing fire. Next again. Having firefighting teams equipped and ready with the equipment that they need and the networks of firefighters to tackle fires swiftly when they happen. Next. Next. Next again. Skip that. So the last thing that I just wanted to talk about quickly. Okay, I'll just be 1 minute talking about this. Yeah, the last thing is just about the importance of biodiversity monitoring and why this is important. Next. This is just some pictures of our research site in Sabangau. So next again. Next again. And so we're lucky, as I mentioned, in Sabangau because we have a long history of research there. So we have a long history of monitoring of trees through plots in Sabangau, and also of orangutan population monitoring as well through counting their nests. And over this time, there's been changes in disturbance that have happened in the area and changes in management. So we can then look at how the forest and the orangutans respond to this. Next, please. And here's a graph showing that. So I will just briefly explain this. So what we have the three different colors kind of on the graph here. On the left here, we have during the period of illegal logging. No, we don't. We have a, sorry, ignore that. On the left here, we have when there was concession logging. So this was legal logging by concession. In the middle here, this kind of orange, pinky color, we have a period of illegal logging. And on the right, the green is a period after protection, after the national park was formed. So the bars are the total area of trees, if you like. So you measure all of the trees and then calculate the total area of tree. And the line is the density of orangutans, or effectively kind of like the number of orangutans. So what we see If we look over time here, this is 1993. This is like 2018 or something. What we see is relatively high numbers at the beginning during the logging concession, and then we see a big drop both in orangutan populations and tree area during the illegal logging period. But we then actually see the tree area recover again afterwards. I mean, it takes quite a long time, it takes 5 years or more, 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 years maybe. But it does kind of recover again. And actually by the end here, it's similar to it was before. And the orangutan population follows a similar trend. So this, I think, is a good illustration here of both the impacts that these disturbances can have, and that can be quite negative and quite serious, but also that there is potential for these to recover again over quite long periods of time with protection in place. And so I think this just kind of illustrates why this type of long-term research can be really important. And I think that is it now. Thank you. Yeah, go through that, ignore that. I think I sent the wrong version here. Yeah, ignore that, ignore. Yep. And again, this is going backwards or something. This is interesting. This is not the version that I said. Anyway, I think that's it. If you just go to the end, the last slide. So yeah, hopefully that was interesting, and hopefully we sort of got a little bit of an understanding of what the forests are, why they're important, why they're threatened, and some of the different things that we're trying to do about it. All right. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Thank you, Mark, for the great presentation. I think this is time for discussion. I believe some of participants will not only have the site participant, but also online participants, right? Can you hear my voice, the online participants? Okay, I hear some response. Okay, yeah. I believe some of you have question. You can raise your hand and mention your name from what university you are, and follow your question. I will choose for 3 participants first. Can you raise your hand,
Recording stopped.
please? Okay,
Recording
1,
in
2.
progress.
Okay, yeah, maybe for the next session. Okay, yeah. Okay, maybe for okay, please.
Hello, Mr. Mark. My name is Amri.
Okay. Yeah, okay, please.
I live in near Tanjung Puting National Park in Central Kalimantan. So in 2015, it's happened a big forest fire, but Mr. Jokowi asking us to build the canal to make the fire down. So what, in your opinion, as environmentalist, to see the canal make to see Mr. President make the policy build the canal near the peatland. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, maybe Mark will respond to the question directly.
Yeah, I think I do remember. I think I do remember that. I mean the strategy adapted by the Indonesian Peatland and Mangrove Restoration Agency, the BRGM, does include re-wetting as one of its core components. and that is similar to what I was talking about in the presentation there. The canals will drain the peatland, and so blocking those canals either through building dams or through infilling, you call it. So you sort of take soil from outside and put the soil into the canals, slows the water down, prevents it leaving the peatland, and that keeps the peatland wetter. Because the peatland is wetter, there is then less likelihood of fire. And so that's basically what the BRGM strategy is. And so there's the kind of, if you like, the national strategy now for that. But you can still, fighting fires in areas of tropical peatland that are far away from rivers is actually quite a difficult thing, because the fires occur when it's dry, and so because there's not therefore water at the surface and you're far away from a river, so that is then very challenging, and the way that and helicopters and aeroplanes can kind of help a little bit, but it's difficult for them to carry the quantity of water that you need. You need lots and lots and lots and lots of water, and they can only carry quite a small amount. And they're also very, very expensive. The other way is to dig bores like a pipe going down into the peat, so that can go quite deep. And then you can get water from below the peatland as well, from maybe 5 meters or something below the peatland. And then you can use that to extinguish the fire.
Okay, next participant.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mark, for an informative lecture. I have a very straightforward and general question. As you all know, every country wants advancement and development. And if we see in example of France, Japan, Germany, in some other European countries, also Asia, China, so they get advancement or development in terms of technology in construction. So how we can go side by side so that we cannot cut the trees, deforestation, and we also achieve development. So there is like a kind of question, why just some countries are contributing to forest conservation in other countries? We consider them as developed countries. Like I can't mention the names, but we all know, but there are no forests. But if Indonesia is contributing as like in conservation, there are a lot of forests. So these forests is not just for Indonesia, it's also benefit us other countries. So how we could go side by side by protecting forests, and also we can go towards development. Yeah, thank you.
That's a great and really important question, and I don't have all the answers to that. Obviously, I'm from the UK, and one of those countries you didn't want to name is probably the UK, because we don't have very much forest left in the UK anymore, and we are a relatively rich nation in the UK, and who am I from the UK to come to Indonesia and try and tell people from Indonesia how to manage their forests? I mean, go away. And that's fair. And I don't want to try and tell Indonesian people how to manage their forests. That's not what I'm trying to do. It's more trying to understand forests and help. Help understand forests and try and explore together how we might manage forests most effectively. But yeah, how do we? Obviously, people want to develop. A lot of people in tropical peatland areas, in particular, are relatively poor. even compared to other places in Indonesia. And, they want to develop, they want good things in their life. Of course they do. We should aim to give them those things. That's only fair and right. I think we do need to do that in a kind of sensible and well, not sensible, maybe it's the wrong word, sensitive and sustainable way. Because if, as I think you kind of suggested, if we degrade these ecosystems too much, then we cause problems for everybody. And fire is maybe the best example. If we disturb tropical peatlands very heavily and drain them heavily, then we get these bad fires, and everybody suffers the negative results of that, including people in outside of Kalimantan as well. We live in the environment. We are part of the environment, and if we destroy our home, then we don't have anywhere to live. So it's a difficult question, and I don't have all the answers, but that would be my perspective.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mark. But here, if you give me the time, just 1 minute, I have a question arises here. There are laws for deforestation, international laws, if I'm not wrong. But why those laws are just in some countries? Those laws, they are going to implement just in some countries. And some countries, they are constructing buildings, they are moving forward towards development. But in some countries, they are following those laws strictly. But in some countries, not. Why? Like, for me, I would say, I can't say this is discrimination. But why it's like if you I don't know, it's a reasonable question or not, but from your perspective, what would be your answer?
Yeah, I know what you think. I know what you mean, and again, it's difficult. I mean, there are arguments at the moment between the EU and Indonesia and Malaysia regarding palm oil and sustainability criteria and everything about that. And then those arguments are very political and very strong, and I'm not going to say too much about that. But it's very important, and it is difficult because obviously countries do want to use their resources and trade in their resources and use their resources for the benefit of their people, and that's understandable and good. But we do also need to ensure that those resources are managed sustainably. And in some ways, perhaps, as I say, I'm from the UK and we haven't managed our environment very well. And we've seen that now we don't have any forests, and that's not a good thing. It would be sad if places like Indonesia and some of the other countries where you guys are from that have this incredible wildlife also lost it like we have in the UK. So that's not a great answer, maybe.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. Okay. For the next participant, please.
Thank you. I'm Idia. I want to ask, actually, I never see peatlands or peat forest before. So why peatlands can be dried? And one of the way to save peatland is rewetting. Right? What about the pH, like potential of hydrogen of the water? Potential of hydrogen, pH. pH level. pH level. Yeah. Is it naturally, or we need to make it acid water? Okay, just that. Thank you.
Yeah. The drainage is the drainage occurs because people create the drainage. So that has generally either been I suppose there's sort of two different types of canals that have been built. There's really big canals that are built by machines, so using industrial machinery to dig canals that maybe are 10 meters wide or 15 meters wide or something, and those have tended to occur for agricultural development. And then there are smaller canals that have been dug by illegal loggers that are still in forest that are maybe only 1 meter or 2 meters wide or something. But all of these canals, basically, as soon as you create those canals, you create a kind of fast route for the water to leave the forest. And so even if the original disturbance is no longer happening, the water still leaves, right? I mean, we had in Sabangau is a good example. We had illegal loggers there, and in around 2004, the illegal logging was stopped. So there was no more making of new canals. The illegal loggers left, but the canals were still there because no one closed them. So the water carried on leaving the forest, and there was still the risk of fire for many, many years afterwards until you have blocked those canals to re-wet the area. And so that's the problem. And it's easier to dig a canal than it is to block it again, unfortunately. And yeah, regarding pH and hydrogen, yeah. The pH in tropical peatlands is very acidic, so it's about 3 or 4, which is also about the same as Karangas, actually. And that's an important characteristic of the ecosystem as well, because not all species of animals and plants can live in that acid environment, and that limits some of the different species that can be found there. I mean, for example, in most forests in the tropics in Borneo, you have lots of leeches, but we don't actually get those in tropical peatlands. So, if you go to the island forest, the Dipterocarp forest, where leeches everywhere, you come out of the forest and there's like 10 of them all over you, but there's none in the tropical peatland. And I think the reason for that is because the water is too acid and they can't live there. So maybe that's an example that makes people happy, but but there are other examples as well. It's just
Okay, next participants, please.
Okay. Did you have the study about the peatland or swamp forest in Thai before? That I want to ask about in the few years ago and for now, and it had a fire burning on the swamp forest in Thailand because it's a dry, the water in the forest is dry, and some people when they get to find something that they burn, that's why it's a problem. Is the worst fire in 5 years, and that's why from uh, as a result of the climate change crisis, is a change the weather or change the change the weather and about in the forest that and have the problem, and I want to know how to handle with this or how to management forest in the climate change crisis like this. Yes.
Yes. Yeah. Climate change is not something that I talked about. Actually, I should have done. But yeah, that's of course an additional threat that faces forests and biodiversity in Kalimantan. Same as everywhere in the world, of course. But yeah, so As I understand, and I'm not a climate scientist, but as I understand, the general predictions for Kalimantan is that climate change is likely to lead to, firstly, to more frequent El Nino events and possibly more severe El Nino events, and also to rainfall. Maybe the total amount of rainfall is not changing. Maybe it stays about the same, but the dry season maybe gets longer and the wet season maybe gets shorter. Is my understanding, and that is going to be a challenging thing for tropical peatlands because they need to be wet, and because in dry conditions and in El Nino events, the risk of fire is higher. So that is an additional challenge. And that is one reason I think why re-wetting peatlands and restoring peatlands now is so important, because if the peatlands are in good condition and if they're wet, then they are resilient to fire, they don't burn. So, if we can restore peatlands now and make them in good condition, which is what the Indonesian government is trying to do, so, that's great, then we will be in a better position to, to confront the threat of climate change.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. I think we will still have for the last 5 minutes. Maybe if one question, please. Wait, okay. Okay, maybe you, please. Interesting presentation, Pak Mark.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mark, for the fruitful sharing. Doctor just shared that the nesting of orangutan increased since 2016, but there seems like there were not much difference between the basal area of the tree, and it seems interesting for me, which means that the forest fire might not that serious, but I'm not that sure. So I'm curious about the efforts behind this, whether it happened naturally or NGO did something to increase the nesting of orangutan. Maybe could you slightly share about the method of calculating the nesting, either by drone or ground surveying? Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, good question. I talked about that very quickly, so I didn't give a very complete explanation. So yes. The graph that I showed there was for an area of forest that wasn't burned, so there wasn't fire in that area, where this monitoring happened, is I think the first point. And so the loss of trees there was due to logging disturbance, so people just removing trees from the forest. And we assessed that through tree plots. So we had plots of different sizes, but essentially you have a rectangle, and within that rectangle you measure the size, the diameter of all of the different trees. And if you do that for every tree in the plot, then you can add all of that together and you get a total area of trees in the area of plot. So that's an indication of the condition of the forest. And so that was the tree measurement. That's what that was. The orangutan population was measured, as you say, by counting nests. It's very hard to actually see orangutans in the forest. So, you can walk around the forest and not see orangutans. They're at low density and difficult to see because they're in the canopy and they're shy and quiet, etc. So we count orangutans normally through their nests. So at night time, they break branches and then they make a nest, kind of like a really big bird's nest in the trees. And you can still see the nest for 3 or 4 months maybe after the orangutan was there. So you can count the nests, and then you can use a formula to convert that into the number of orangutans. So if you know how many nests orangutan build a day, how many, what proportion of the orangutans build a nest because babies don't, then you can work out how many orangutans there are. And so that was the methods, and the methods were the orangutan counts were line transects. So you have a transect and you walk along a line and look and count the nests that you could see. And we have recently experimented with surveying orangutans through drones as well, and that does work. There's some difficulties, but we didn't have that method 20 years ago, so that's only like new, like this year, kind of last year. Maybe does that kind of answer your question? So yeah, we saw the loss of trees because of the illegal logging, and also we saw the reduction in the orangutan population because there were less trees and less food, and also two, because the orangutans wanted to move away from the disturbance area. And then after the illegal logging stopped, the area was protected. So there was no planting of trees. The area was protected and the trees grew back again. And the orangutan population was able to recover because of that. So yeah, a bad news story and a good news story.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much, Mark. Yeah. Very great presentation and very fruitful discussion in this evening. We still have some participants who have a question. Maybe you can ask the question directly with to Pak Mark after this session. Okay, and maybe I will summarize for a little, yeah, about the session. We know that the tropical peatland is important in our ecosystem because of the high biodiversity, and we must to preserve this ecosystem. And you know that to form the peat in this ecosystem will take 1,000 years and more than 1,000 years. And I believe we are all of us in this room, we are the agent of change, not change the forest to degraded area, but we change the degraded area into forest. And I believe we could, we could conduct the sustainable forest management, the balancing ecosystem between forest sustainable ecosystem with our development for our life. Yeah, maybe that's all for this session. Thank you very much. Thank you, Pak Mark. Okay, have a nice day. Thank you. Welcome.
Thank you so much for Dr. Mark and also Mr. Fikri that has already made a communicate discussion with comprehensive materials. We hope to see you again. We are really thankful to have you as one of our second speaker today. Before we're gonna proceed to last but not least our topics today, please everyone let us raise from your seat to take a picture together in front of here as usual, because we have to give a memento as our appreciation for Dr. Mark to being speakers today. And also for Dr. Rini, please let us rise also to give a memento and let's take picture together here. So this is our appreciation symbolized to Miss Dr. Mark Horrison. Please give a warm applause. And also the memento from the Faculty of Forestry UGM. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you so much, Dr. Mark. Please, everyone, have sit back again. Before we're gonna proceed to the last but not least our topic discussion today, we're gonna have a coffee break in 30 minutes and come back again at 3 p.m. sharp. Thank you so much, everyone. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Recording stopped.
Check. Okay. Welcome back again, ladies and gentlemen. Please pay your attention and have your seat back because we're going to proceed to the last discussion session of this second 7 International Summer Course Program. Commence our activities. We're gonna move to the last but not least for today's session, lecture session, with the topic about assessing ecosystem functioning in regenerating forests, a plant trait-based approach, which will be presented by Dr. Putu Diana Mahayani, Bachelor of Forestry, and moderated by Mr. Akmal Nurjihad, Bachelor of Forestry and Master of Science. As usual, I would like to give a brief introduction from the Dr. Diana's resume. So one of the achievements of Dr. Diana in 2008 that she was got the Golden Key International Honor Society Australian National University. Then in 2007 until 2009, Dr. Diana got the Australian Partnership Scholarship for Diploma and Master Graduate Programs. While our moderator for this session is Mr. Akmal, currently contributes to the recent project such as silvopasture for dairy goat farm in Purworejo, Central Java, Indonesia, and also agroforestry catalog documenting traditional agroforestry practices in Indonesia. And also, Mr. Akmal have so many achievements. One of them is in 2016, Mr. Akmal got social research grants on student creativity program by Ministry of Research, Technology and Higher Education of Republic Indonesia at Temajuk Village, frontier village between Indonesia and Malaysia. Without further ado, the topic about assessing ecosystem functioning in regenerating forests, a planned trait-based approach, which will be presented by Dr. Putu Diana Mahayani. The time is yours. Give the applause, please.
Recording in progress.
Oke, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Selamat siang, good afternoon, everyone, and distinguished participant and guest lecturer, Sortaka, and the coordinator of the committee for this summer course. As mentioned before by the master of ceremony, my name is Akmal Jihad. I am from Department of Silviculture. My major is Silviculture and Agroforestry, Universitas Gadjah Mada. And then actually the ceremony has read the CV or resume of our speaker. I'm delighted here to be your moderator for this session. And we will discuss about assessing ecosystem functioning, plant trait approach, and then we have an amazing speaker for this session. And then without any more explanation, maybe I can move the microphone and the stage for Dr. Putu Diana. Time is yours.
Thank you, Mas Akmal. Maybe I will just stand up, then I can see the screen. Good afternoon, everyone. Hopefully everyone's still awake. I'm in the final session, but I hope I can make your eyes open after this. So let's see. So while preparing for my presentation slide, I'm Diana. I just finished my PhD in 2021 from Thailand, from King Mongkut University. Yeah. So I will share part of my study there in this session. And the title is it's about assessing the ecosystem functioning using a plant trait-based approach. Some of you might know about this, or not yet. We can discuss about this approach. So I changed the title a little bit, which actually is not. It doesn't change the meaning. It's about the assessing ecosystem functioning in regrowth forest, a plant trait-based approach. And this approach is part of my PhD study. And before we going to this approach, I will give some introduction. Next, Mas Bima. So just to bold the term of regrowth forest is actually the secondary, and in this object is tropical rainforest. It's a tropical rainforest, a woodland which has been disturbed, and then it's regrown or regenerate after any disturbance, including logging, the clearing for agriculture, or any other disturbance. It's natural disturbance, for example. The other, some other term for this forest is regenerating forest, or second growth forest, or secondary succession forest. Okay. Here is some snapshot of a tropical forest. You can see the canopy layer of tropical forest. Here's another from Java. Here's another picture of how the diversity of tropical forest, including the animals that add the biodiversity. However, as mentioned in the previous session, disturbance is there, was there, still there, and resulted this kind of fragmentation, and also next one, some patchy forests like this. So the state of secondary tropical forest or secondary forest in general is quite large area in number. Next. So to make it a bit clear that this might be a little bit long, so the outline of my presentation is the first one. I would like to describe about the state of secondary tropical forest, and the second one is about regenerating forest after disturbance. The third one is assessing the ecosystem functioning, and the last one I will describe a bit about a plant trait-based approach. So as the snapshot that I saw earlier, that the state of secondary tropical forest can be seen from some figures. Next, Mas Bima. From this study in 2014 in Borneo, similar to the picture that's shown by Mark earlier, that next. They start in 1990. If you can see, the number is a bit small, from the intact forest and how the changes in the forest cover up to 2010 here. As you can see, there's a change in color, and this yellow one is a road development in Borneo. Next. And if you can see the road length, the longest one happened or developed in 1973 up to 1990. And this is shown as a result, can be shown from these pictures. When Dr. Mark also mentioned about the leftover is on this side, the other factor is what I observed, because it's a lowland forest. Lowland forest with quite not so extreme environment, and quite shady, not so extreme in terms of the temperature and everything. It resulted an ecosystem that with high diversity. And the exploitation is there. And one of the causes why the leftover forest is in the heart of Borneo, because it's a high elevation, difficult access. So what is there now? Okay, next. Next one, swimmer. And these are the figure, the proportion of land cover type in Berau. Is we can focus on the bottom bar here, that the proportion of secondary forest is very high. The primary forest is still okay, but the secondary forest high density is also a lot. This shows that this forest has been disturbed and left regrowth, but the proportion is very big. Next. And they might look like the one on the left or the one in the middle. So what is the potential of this secondary forest with the large proportion left? Next. And before going there, there's some management, forest management practice too that cause the fragmentation or the patchy forest or the damage of the forest. This example how the this is example how the non-forest of clear-cut logging, and the middle one is the selective logging with the conventional method, and the one on the left is the impact logging approach. So what's the difference between the middle one and the right one is whether the logging is supervised or not. Supervised in terms of where the tree fell, that will cause the amount of damage caused by logging. So for reduced impact logging or real, it is a supervised logging. And the result is different. The remnant landscape is on the left, in the middle, and on the right. Next. So logging, whatever the intensity, whatever the method used, it always creates damage. The difference is that between the real and the conventional logging is, so real mainly reduced skidding damage, reduced by 25%, lower than the conventional logging. However, next month. However, the logging intensity, even though it is reduced impact logging, will cause some logging damage. Next. And the difference between the conventional and the reduced impact logging is like not so much different, not so much lower compared to the conventional logging. So the forest management regime, next, will determine the structure of the forest, and will affect the biodiversity of the forest. And including the carbon is one of our focus now, how the logging will affect the carbon in the forest. And another one, including the wildlife with the fragmentation. Next. Next. So if next one, just up to the last, yeah, the third one. Okay. So the change in forest structure, we can see from the abundance, the density of each species, the natality, mortality, the spatial pattern of some species, especially the commercial one. With the changes or with the disturbance will cause the imbalance of homeostasis. What I mean with this is how the forest respond to disturbance. And this will affect to the ecological function. Some that we can see easily is from the physiognomy and also the species diversity, composition, and distribution. So when we want to see the result of disturbance, we usually focus on the number of species. We usually focus on the distribution. Next. And or the number of the carbon stock resulted after the disturbance. But actually what happened with the forest after being disturbed? Next. With the large proportion of the secondary forest, next month, is actually like 46%. It actually has a potential value, potential conservation value. Now it depends on the method, the forest management practice. It depends on the intensity too. This figure showing how the secondary forest carbon accumulation after being disturbed from 0 up to 40 years. That when this forest is still left abandoned or left for growth again, it has some potential value. And some drivers of this above ground carbon, some are from variable over there. The forest age, the SW is the short wave radiation, and some other variable. Okay. Some indicators measure the ecological function as this one, the habitat connectivity or the forest functioning, and also the ecosystem homeostasis. We want to see how the forest develop and how we can measure that this community back to the original one, or at least the same like the initial condition. And before, and to sometime when we want to see whether there's a changes to what trajectory to the major forest, we usually measure with the number of species. But before that, maybe we can see a glance here. How many species are there in the tropical forest? So based on the study by Ferry Slick in 2015, this is the area of the study. Next, and next, a little bit, okay. There are about 40,000 up to 53,000 species in the tropic. And if we compare, if we are in this blue line, so we take a vertical line here with the same sample size, we can identify that the number of species in the tropical Indo-Pacific region is higher than in continental Africa. Of course, this data depends on the number of the sample site. There are many sample sites in tropical Indo-Pacific region, but if we want to compare, we should use the same size of sample site. Okay, next. And here's the evidence that the second growth forest has some potential values. This is from my PhD study. And instead of only using the number of species to measure the changes, I also use different approach. The first one is using the phylogenetic diversity, which I will not share here. But the second one that I will share with you, using a plant trait-based approach to see whether there's a changes after 10 years of logging. And this is just an additional slide that when the forest regrowth, then the animal life will follow. Okay. So this forest management, how the forest is managed, how the what practice is done will affect the result of the remnant forest, the rest of the forest. So commercial forest concessionaires can play a role to increase the value of conservation in the area that they manage. And how to restore is how to measure the ecosystem function before and after, and how many species are similar from previous one, and how much different they are from before. And also how we choose a metric to measure whether we can capture the different or not, or whether we can capture the change or not using a directional informative metrics. Next. And here in the study that I use is how to see the similarity or dissimilarity of forest community on plant, the changes in functional trait composition and its diversity. Next. So how to apply this approach? Next. So as an overview, there are three approaches or three views when on communities. If we want to see a forest community, especially for plants, we usually see a community as a composed of a number of species or taxonomic entities, which is called as taxonomic approach. But we can also see a communities that composed of plants possessing traits or different characters instead of only focusing on the number of species. With these two approaches, we can measure the changes. We can measure the functional trait diversity. We can also measure the functional structure, the functional composition, and function itself that can explain better by the functional trait approach instead of only using taxonomic approach. Instead of only seeing the changes in number of species. Next. We hear quite often about biodiversity and ecosystem function relationship. When the number of species increase, then we can say that the function also more or better or diverse. But sometimes when you have data like this, what can you say only with number of species? So it's like suggesting there is a relationship, but it's saturating. Instead of seeing the functional diversity with the ecosystem function that we're interested in. So before on here, you might wonder, so how to measure it? As a clue, that functional trait is a properties of a whole organism or suborganismal that affect the ecological process. So any character of the species that explain any ecological processes included as functional traits. So in this approach, when we want to measure the changes in the forest after disturbance, functional trait composition is more preferable than only seeing the number of species. Okay, next. So how this to approach taxonomic and functional trait differences? When we see community based on the number of species, we use a demographic based rule. abundance, the number of species, the abundance of each species. And this still, this is the basic information that can describe the interaction among different populations. But the other approach, when we see communities not only based on the name, but also the character of the species, which is a trait-based rule, we can describe the position of different traits, increase or decrease the chance of success of different plants. Okay, next. And how these two approaches can be supplement to each other to understand the community assembly mechanism. What is happening during the before and after disturbance, and why the variation of the species is like we are seeing now. So the taxonomic approach can describe the variation in community structure, yes, but it cannot predict community composition when you ask about the species and the number of species. However, with the functional trait-based rule, we can predict the ecosystem process. So, and mostly the relationship is not showing like a saturating, but more informative and easier in what is actually happened from one period to another period after disturbance. Okay, next. And for conservation perspective, when we focus on the functional composition on only number, because plants species are a lot, like tens of thousands, and they have an overlap function. So when we focus on the properties that relate to the ecological process, then we be able to know the trajectory of the regrowth forest. Next. This is an example that how the change of community structure is described by this figure. Like you can say that time explain only 2 to 20% of why the tree density increased, why the basal area increased, but we don't know why the species change and species composition change. Next. And this, the picture that I saw before, that some drivers were identified here, but how do we know the mechanism? How do we know the precipitation? How do we know the radiation with this variable to explain the mechanism of the ecosystem functioning? Next. So this is the last part, main part that how to use this approach. So trait-based ecology is associated with the sub-discipline of comparative plant ecology and functional ecology. So it's using the character of the species as an explanatory variable. So it will combine all the traits of all species that are there in the communities and see the variation in there. So we are doing from the leaf, the organism level, up to the whole plant individual, up to the community, and how to combine this level into one that we can describe the establishment or the community development. Okay, next. So when we can identify the character of each species for the whole plant, for example, plant height, diameter, leaf size, and everything, when we relate it to the environmental factors, we relate to the function that can be explained by trade, and then we can explain about ecosystem service that is resulted by any states of the forest. So a trade-based approach is an approach to understand how vegetation function and vary in composition, spatially and temporally. So you can compare before and after, and in different sites. So by attempting to recognize the major strategies of each species that evolve in plants, we can relate this process to determine structure and species composition of vegetation in particular, and the properties of the ecosystem. Next. Some questions that are raised from this approach, for example, as first, how do the trajectory of regenerating forests recover toward functional diversity and composition of disturbed forests, or area or plant functional traits affect the variation in species richness of regenerating forests? And many questions that can be raised from here. Next. So from each species that we identify from our plot, we choose the trait that relate to our question. For example, carbon or forest succession or any ecological function that you are interested in. Carbon, for example, height. For carbon stock, height, wood density, and then leaf size. Roots can be, depends on your hypothesis. And then how your theory support the trait that you choose. Next, in relating to the functional, to the ecosystem function that you are interested in. So in this article, we report the short-term and the longer-term impact of logging, but one that I will show only the 10 years result, because 1 year after logging is not so significant. And compare the forest community among different logging practice, conventional logging, reduced impact logging, and additional intervention, silviculture, thinning, with practice that support of us enhance the forest development. And we use forest functional diversity and forest functional composition as a measure of these changes. And we focus how the species character or trait related to the acquisition and conservation trade-off, which relate to the forest succession, like the acquisition conservation resource, showing whether the states of the forest is pioneer, intermediate, or up to the late succession states. So in my study, we have 600 species, more than that. And we identify for each trait that we choose relate to the process that we're interested, which is the forest succession after logging. So we have limitation that not all species has information out there. We cannot really measure everything. Then we only choose traits that are important. And not all species has this information, like the wood density, the height. Maximum height means when it gets to the mature age, what the maximum height, the leaf size, the leaf length ratio, propagal size, and up to whether that is a promoted or non-promoted tree in terms of commercial value. Whether the practice that had been applied will sustain the species, the abundance of commercial species or not. Okay, next. And then how to analyze it. From this 600 something species, we want to know how close the character of one species to the other species. We use a distance-based a measure. And because we use different types of functional trait, there's a categorical, ordinal, or continuous traits. And then we use a goer distance to create this functional traits. And then we also analyze the quality of the functional tree, whether it is tested or not, using this one, the method from the MER, the quality of the functional space. So the lower the mean square deviation, the higher the quality of the functional traits, and the lower one is the 4-dimension one to create a functional tree that we can use for further analysis. Next. And this is the result of 10 years forest community after logging. If you can see as a general, the arrow that close to each other mean that how to call that, it's related to the categorical trait of its successional species. Like the early successional species has a small propagule, and then leaf size, bigger leaf size, or the late successional species has a different character. So we want to see how different practice affect to the functional diversity. So with that distance, we can use the distance between species using the Simpson diversity index to measure the functional diversity. So this from this figure or from this graph, we can see that in conventional logging, there are more proportion of early successional species. With Socorri, for example, Socorri dispersal agent with a small propagule as commonly belong to the pioneer species with a bigger leaf size. So from this example, we can explain what is actually changed, not only based on the number of species. Next. Yeah, this is the different among different practice in terms of the functional traits, and this number showing the difference before and after. So you can read more in detail in the article, and not only for functional alpha diversity, but also for functional beta diversity. Next. So in beta diversity, now in the next stage, not only based on the number of species, but now it's not only on alpha, but also on beta diversity. In the value of beta diversity, we can also identify what causes difference. Beta diversity is a species dissimilarities among two sites. So when we got this value, the similarity, for example, is 70%. So these two numbers of value can explain what caused the dissimilarity, whether it's species replacement or the richness differences. If I explain about it, it's long, you can ask later. So next. So with this beta diversity, there are many information that we can gain. For example, for the extension. If these yellow figures were species and it is exploited, what will happen with the after disturbance? If the same species been exploited or locked for ages, what will happen with the disturbed forest? whether it's going to be homogenized or whether it's going to be heterogeneous. So going up to higher level is also very interesting to see whether the changes or the development is the same or not compared to the previous communities. Next. Here's another example from an article in Trends and Ecology Evolution. When you want to compare, maybe I go this side. When you want to have some function that you want to assess. Let's say this the TP is timber production, the CP is crop production, and R is nutrient retention. CD is conservation and fauna diversity. And from these initial communities, with any practice, result in different species composition, A, B, C, 1 to 4. And that is the function that you can gain after. The same. The number of species, the same, the alpha diversity the same, but the beta diversity is different. So the question is that what if we want to have all those functions? Or whether we can have all those functions if the remnant forest is what we have now. So from taxonomic to functional trait approach, from alpha to beta diversity. Yeah, of course, the result of this study, logging intensity will determine the logging damage, the forest damage. Low intensity is required, and the intensity is higher, then the composition of functional traits also change. Next. So summary, that functional, next must be more. Functional function will affect by the forest management, and it will determine the ecosystem surface provided by the ecosystem. And last but not least, that assessing changes in composition or beta diversity level is suggested. This should be supplemented by functional trait approach to be able to detect changes in forest assembly after disturbance. That's all my presentation. Hopefully you are inspired to apply this approach. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay.
Dr. Diana, for amazing explanation about assessing ecosystem functioning. So we are moving to Q&A session. Is there any question? Please raise your hand. Is there any question, or maybe you guys can share your perspective or opinion about what Dr. Diana said before?
Maybe it's too complicated. Counting the number of species is easier than calculating the functional diversity. Yeah. But actually, there are many resources available on website, like a trait-based information that you can propose, that you can request, and the amount of the data is a lot, like millions of data there. You can request for particular species, or you can request for particular traits for free. It doesn't mean that you have to measure everything there, especially for leaf types, wood density. You don't have to do a lot of destructive sampling, but it depends on the scale of your study. So a lot of data available, but for tropical countries still need to be contributed, maybe by you, some of you. But mostly the one that available is from subtropical forest. But yeah, it depends on the scale of your study. Maybe if it's small scale, then you can do some sampling. If it's large scale, like my study, like 600 species, then I have to rely on plant trait database.
Please.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry, Bu. My question is how to build the forest after the forest fire. Yes, because to decide the varieties of the forest in different place is different, right? Especially for Kalimantan or Sumatra had a different varieties. So how you to decide the varieties to reforestation?
Okay. So first is to identify what species that can live in such condition, whether it is open or half open or how dry. Then it's a species selection. That's one of the benefit of recognizing the trait of the species is for choosing which species that correct to be planted for restoration. So now is whether you want to, let's say you want to cover the soil first, the ground first, then you should choose the pioneer species, which is a fast growing species, instead of directly using the late successional species. So the difference with the pioneer with the late successional species, if you go to the forest and you see the structure and there are small trees under the canopy, they're included as a late successional species. They are usually shorter, but the wood is very hard because they grow slow. And when you compare the wood density with the pioneer, they grow fast, but the wood density is very low. It's a soft wood. So yeah, if you have this database like, oh, this tree is including as a pioneer species and it grows, you use data plot from the same area. This species grow there, then it can be suitable for the area that you are going to restore. So database is then come the backup which species that you will use or which species that you grow later.
Thank you. Yeah, continue to the second.
Thank you very much for your presentation. That was really technical.
Yes. That's why.
Okay. My question is about your story was limited to 10 years after exploitation.
Yes.
So I want to know if you can make some projections to know how long does it required for the forest to recover completely and to reach another the state to be like re-exploited again by logging companies. I will take the case of my country, for example. I'm from Cameroon. My name is Nanda. The government installed a rotation period of 30 years in my country, so that when a forest management unit is assigned to a logging company, they divide the surface area into 30 annual cutting area.
Yeah.
So each cutting area is exploited every year. So after 30 years, normally the first cutting area that was exploited first is supposed like to be recovered and able to be re-exploited for the second rotation and so on.
Okay.
So I would like to know from your research if you can make a projection to know maybe after 20 years or if there's a difference from the if we apply normal exploitation techniques or we applied reduced impact logging techniques. Thank you.
Okay. So the first question that I would like to be more specific, what recovery are you expecting? But I heard a little bit that you are mentioning about the commercial trees, not mentioning about the other ecological function. No. You're only interested in commercial. Yes, it's a very commercial minded. Well, that's true. But the other forest structure also will, with the commercial species can really grow well. Depends on the community structure surrounded the species. How long? First, we don't talk about commercial species yet. For species number in the same area in Borneo, it will take only 8 hours, sorry, 8 years to recover to the same number of species of undisturbed forest. 8 years, 10 years, the number of species, but the species composition might change. That's if we only measure the taxonomic view. And then Mas bisa yang tadi ke belakang. There's a phylogenetic approach. It's using the evolutionary information of each species. And based on my study, the log forest, the log forest recover within the phylogenetic diversity of the log forest recover within 10 years. But when I use the functional trait approach, the composition changed after 10 years for high intensity logging, but not for low intensity logging, which is like 4 square meter per hectare. But when we talk about function, the biomass stock has not recovered within 10 years. And yang grafik yang panjang. And when you see the commercial species, let me do, just to make it clear. Ke bawah lagi. Iya, ke bawah. Oh iya, kurang dekatnya. Nah, bawah lagi. Lagi. Lagi, Pak. Oh, ini ke atas ya? Oh, maksudnya ke bawah tuh ke yang terakhir. Just want to make it clear that I might be forgotten something. Lagi, Pak. Lagi. Nah, ini, this one. So if we can identify that there are many early successional species with a small propagal, the big leaf size means that the forest is still on the stage of pioneer community. And then you can see here the promoted category. The proportion of commercial trees has not recovered within 10 years. And some studies said that it might not be recovered up to 60 years. It depends on your environmental condition. So with the combination of these functional traits, it said that for low intensity logging, it can recover. But this result is from various intensity logging. So now it depends on the intensity. You want to do low intensity but recover soon, like 30 years in rotation, or high intensity but recover longer. Yes. And for biomass stock, it can be longer too. So yes. Now you get more, or you log more, you get more now, but you wait for a longer time. Okay. Any question? More question?
Yes. Please, you also said the diversity, there's a change in terms of diversity meaning that the species present before exploitation are different from the species after the recovering period.
Yes.
Why? Is there any explanation?
So one of the benefit of using functional trait approach, then you can identify the mechanism of the community assembly, whether it is caused by competition, whether it is caused by habitat filtering or any other mechanism. This can be recognized by what the species is, how the character, and also how closely related those species in one community from the evolutionary background. Whether they are closely related mean that they consume the same resource and there will be competition. But whether they are competition or not, then you can combine two approaches, phylogenetic and functional trait diversity. And that will be my third clarification. So I cannot answer that now. But at least you can a little bit have a clue. Particularly if your community is like this, one of the reason is because the one that grows is a fast growing species, it likes sunlight. Then we can assume that what mechanism is the habitat filtering because of the canopy opening, because of a lot of sunlight, it's a lot of resource. So what grows there is this group of species.
Yeah, it's also my point of view because I get to know that in the tropical forest, when the canopy is open, we have 3 generations of trees.
Yes.
When the canopy is open, the fast growing species first, they grow fast. Yeah. When they grow, they cover the canopy, the seed of like heavy wood will now germinate and start growing easily.
Yep.
When they grow, the fast growing species, they can die.
Yep.
And the third generation will also grow. Yeah. I think maybe it's the reason of...
At least from what group of species are they, then we can identify which states of forest succession is now happening. Oh, one more thing, that your question about how to enhance the recovery. This one, there is the blue one. Sorry, you might get confused. The blue one is whether the log of a forest got another intervention of silvicultural practice, whether they are thin or not thin after 10 years. So this is during first 10 years, and this one with additional treatment with thin and unthin intervention. So the thin one is the darker blue. When you treat your commercial species more by liberating some individual that are not commercial species, and then you expect it to grow faster and bigger. The thin treatment from my study showed that the growth is faster, with showing, of course, because we remove some let's say non-commercial trees surrounded the small trees, and then we compare the species composition and the functional composition. It's so similar in terms of between those two log forests with thin and the undisturbed forest within 10 years. And again, that I would like to highlight, of course, with the low intensity logging. So thing is quite costly, but it gets faster for the recovery. So within 20 years, it showed that the species composite and the functional composition is similar for low intensity logging. Okay, any more questions? Can ask more questions. Please. Okay.
Hi, doctor. This study applied a plant trait approach in a human disturbed area due to the logging.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering that is this method applicable to areas which
To where?
which is naturally disturbed area? naturally disturbed forests like
Yeah.
volcanic eruption or flood?
Definitely. Yes. It's just example that is from the log forest and the recovery of the log forest. So any condition, you can use this approach. Even when you want to see whether what animal will come back after disturbance, then you can identify the fruit size. When the species with the small fruit size, so what animal we can expect to come back? What the big species, the big fruit size, then what species are there? Or how this animal as an agency of dispersal of the species. So with identification of this plant trait, we can explain many aspects. Why the species are there can be affected or not there anymore when one animal as the dispersal agent is gone. Then you can use this approach too. So it's easier to explain when you only focus on the number of species. When you only focus on tree density or basal area. So you use that trait to explain many things. So can be applicable. Any more question? Please. Okay. It's getting hot. Okay.
It's not question, but can you share about your experience in when you study in Thailand? It's about civic culture, right?
Okay.
And when you study in Thailand, or maybe it's, your opinion about the forest situation in Thailand,
Okay.
if you know.
So from Thailand is Sawadika. That's how to say hello in there. I don't have a lot of experience in Thailand because my study site is in Borneo. But I went to Sakerat. Sakerat, yes. It's one of the research center. Many my Ajahn have a working study site there from my colleagues study about birds, animal, and then we also went Khao Yai and some areas, mangrove areas in the south, because my suppose is a Thai, and his field study is about animals. So we went across the mangrove area in the south for seeing. Now it's in Bahasa, it's berang-berang. Otter. I know in Thai, otter. The animal, the cute animal. Nah,ใช่ค่ะ Yeah. So I don't have much experience there just because family reason that I studied there, but my study site is here. So I learned because I just like my supposed to go to the field, but not much experience with measuring. But I heard that you have a forest monitoring site in the later at the front is M or something. Is it in Khao Yai for 30 years? Which is a very good database to see the changes of the forest community after 30 years. The one who lead the forest monitoring is a guy from UK or US. It's a Parang. It's not. Parang is a foreigner in Thai. So I think it's a very good data if you can. I don't know, is it in Khao Yai or not? Yeah. Yeah. You're welcome. Oh yeah, there's a question from this side. Okay.
Wait, okay. Hi.
Hi.
My name is Iman. I'm from UPM.
Okay. There.
Huh?
I've been there once.
Oh, when?
2005.
Oh, long time ago.
Maybe you are still kindergarten.
Yeah, still kindergarten.
Okay.
Okay. So I have a question.
Okay.
As we already know, our forest, especially rain how to say, our forests, especially from Indonesia and Malaysia, our rainforests are unique because the age is much older than Amazon forest.
Okay.
So as a silviculturist, so I would like to know, other than, when doing the carbon dating method, so what kind of method that you use to determine the age of the forest, other than the carbon dating?
It's a very good question because that's part of the other article that I show you. It's about a phylogenetic approach, and you can, for the database of plant, the phylogenetic tree that are available so far up to 2019, when I analyze the data, is up to genus level. You can read my article where I cite where I got the database of the phylogenetic tree of plant species, and you can use this approach to measure the phylogenetic diversity. The basic data or information is how old is that species, and you can incorporate the abundance of the species or just using the present absent data to calculate this functional diversity. So you select, you cut the tree based on the species that you have, the community. Then you can calculate the phylogenetic tree based on the distance of the sum of the distance of species that you have in your community. Then you will be able to know whether the community is composed of an old age of species or a younger one. If you see it in one species per se, then you can also describe by the age. But when we want to talk about community, and then what is the total length of distance of all species in one community, and you compare with Indonesia, for example, and Malaysia, which one is older? But it is based on the total length. So, so by only having a number of species, you can calculate this. You can study this.
So we calculate the age based on a species that we target, right?
Pardon?
So we calculate the age of the forest by a species that we are looking for, right?
Yeah.
Because before this, I have read about, around the Baltic Sea, there is some ancient tree that produce a resin.
Yeah.
And usually that resin will trap the insects 30 million, even 100 million years ago.
Okay.
During the, ocean time or something.
Yes.
But of course, from dinosaur time.
Yeah.
So I have read that they calculate the region, the region by the resin of the tree. So we do not use the same method here, or
you can use the functional trait approach when you want to identify whether this tree has a resin or not, or the other thing. It functional trait approach when we interested on function. But if you interested in that diversity from evolutionary ground, then you have to use phylogenetic approach. It's very easy. I mean, it's can be. I mean, the database is that you just have to have the list of species in your community that you want to compare to the others, and then you request the database of phylogenetic tree of whole species in, I think that is for tropical countries. And then in my article, I describe, I hope hopefully it's clear enough how to separate your species in your community from the data set. And then a little bit of command R, and you can calculate phylogenetic diversity.
okay, thank you so much for your answer.
You're welcome. Another question, so yeah, Mas siapa?
Hi, Dr.
Yes.
Diana.
Yes.
I'm Shakila from University Malaysia Sabah, Borneo, Malaysia.
Okay.
So I have a few questions. The first one maybe sounds so basic, but I want to learn more about it. I have I have read just go through your research paper just now. So in the abstract, you said that you found that both conventional and RIL resulted in higher functional diversity, but the forest functional traits shifted away from those observed in unlocked forest. So maybe you already explained it just now, but it's too complicated for me to understand. But I wonder what is the differences between the functional diversity and the functional traits and
Composition.
why, like, which one is more important and so on. And then I have another question. So actually for my master degree, I count the carbon storage in a selectively logged forest. So my study sites are one is in the supervised logging. I think it's it's different from the RIL, right? Because it's just a supervised logging. It's not like it did not involve the strict documentation and everything. It's a supervised logging. If you ever heard about it, I did my research in a SWAS experimental area. The plot was established by the people from SWAS, Sweden Agricultural University of Sciences, and then previously they tried to investigate what is the effect of these two logging methods, supervised logging and conventional logging, to the natural regeneration of the stand development of the naturally regenerated forest. So for their part, they already for my part, I count the carbon stock after 27 years after the log happened. So, but my finding shows that there are no longer the carbon stock is no longer statistical different between the three study plot, the study sites. So I wonder, in carbon wise, does the result shows a good thing, or because it only count we only count the carbon, but we did not consider like the specific species of which one of the contribute more carbon. So I mean, can we use it as an indicator that the forest has recovered goodly or something like that? Thank you.
You're welcome. So the first question and the second one relate. The first one, what I mean with the conventional logging or real impact logging, shows the increase of functional diversity. Mean there is the increase of variation of functional traits. That's why I said that not only stop in the alpha level, we should go to the beta level. The number of species might increase, but what are they? The functional traits also increase because the number of species increase. I mean, the variation also increase. That is normal. That's why don't stop there. What are they? Whether they are different from the initial undisturbed forest with the disturbed forest. And when I said it's shift away, mean it is dissimilar from undisturbed and the disturbed one. Means that the variation of the species increase, but they are different species and dominated by pioneer species instead of late successional species. So when this one I haven't published, I also calculate the carbon stock. Within 10 years, it's much lower. It's very low. It's much lower significantly than the undisturbed forest. So if your carbon stock forest, your carbon stock in your forest is lower after 27 years. For me, in my study, 10 years, yes, it obviously must be lower. It's not recovery yet. 27 years, it depends on if it's lower. I cannot say, I have to read in terms of the numbers, whether 27 years is good or not. It's actually depends on what is the condition of the remnant forest after logging. When you did a low intensity logging and you still got a low carbon stock, the question is about what happened with the regeneration of the forest. It's different when you did high intensity logging and the carbon is low, it's normal. It's because the non-forest is severe, maybe it's very bad. So when it is a low intensity logging, so what is the intensity logging in your study site? It's like 10, 15. Yeah. Because the higher the intensity, the more damage are caused by the activity. $12 is quite high. Yeah, one of our study site there has like 15 square meter per hectare. And the one that they select or cutting is 50 to 60 centimeter in dBH. So, yeah. Okay. So that happened with the tin. Oh, no. Yeah, with no. What is the silviculture treatment? Did you do? Pardon? Climber cutting. Ah, yeah. Yeah. It's like a low intervention for climber cutting, right? But this one is liberating cutting. So they free the commercial forest from the other small trees to grow. And the result is showing a positive trajectory. Okay. Hopefully it answered. Okay, thank you. Is there more question? Yeah, we still have 10 minutes, or maybe everyone is expecting to go somewhere after this.
Any question? No?
Okay, thank you for all of your questions. Even it's very technical. Finally, you made a lot of questions, and thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Diana, for explaining assessing ecosystem functioning. I've highlighted several interesting points in her presentation. The first one is about logging is always affect the forest. I remember one of the silvicultural book also mentioned about it, that every treatment from human will affect the forest. And then the second one is about the total species of in a tropical forest. It's about 4,100 up to 53,000 species. And then actually we are in the race between identification of utilization in a good way and whether who is the first one about utilization or the extinction. And then the last is about this topic is let us into more complexity to discuss about forest. Maybe I hope this session, the depth of insight and the exchange of knowledge will give us a well understanding to our forest. Maybe that is for me. Thank you very much. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.